New stars are emerging. These ones don't sing and they don't act. No, they write books, intellectual books, about climate change and inequality, for example. French economist Thomas Piketty and Canadian activist Naomi Klein are stars who are conquering the world with their ideas.
Wealth is about power.
All over the world, they're inspiring and mobilizing millions of people because they identify major problems and the solutions in their books. But also because they are permanently traveling the world, lobbying politicians and giving hundreds of television interviews, which are then shared countless times on social media. Backlight followed them on tour. Is this the new politics? And if so, are these our new politicians?
The very idea that you would be confronted with a planetary crisis and want there to be an action that you as a lone individual could do to impact the planet is actually kind of crazy.
Yeah, because that's
of course you can't do it alone. You need to do it in massive groups of people.
As much as possible.
Please. Sir? Take this. I have the proof of the biggest capital fraud in the Netherlands.
Our national politicians often seem powerless, but famous intellectuals like Thomas Piketty revive our hopes that we can actually tackle the big problems. But is it just hope? Or can they really change things? What's the influence of these intellectual stars? Can Piketty get the world moving where politics has come to a standstill?
You know, I have no problem with private property and capitalism per se.
So you don't think that we should have more taxes in the Netherlands?
Oh no, not at all. None. What I am recommending is to make the tax system more progressive.
With his book, Capital in the 21st Century, the French economist caused a stir around the globe. Drawing on historical research, he demonstrates that wealth inequality has risen sharply since the 1980s.
Dit stond vanochtend op de voorpagina van de Volkskrant. Hij heeft een baanbrekend boek geschreven. Waar ik zei, iedereen had een gut feeling van er is ongelijkheid en die wordt steeds groter. En hij heeft daar de cijfers onder gegeven. En hij heeft de voorzet gegeven voor de politiek. En je voelt het in de samenleving, je voelt dat mensen die onrechtvaardigheid voelen. En het is nu aan politici om ervoor te zorgen dat de ideeën die er nu zijn en de samenleving die er klaar voor is om dat om te zetten in politieke daden.
How do you feel about Dutch political parties put you in a left-wing position?
Well, I think there is some interest in the book, you know, both from the left and from the right. And, you know, I think it's useful to read books, you know, whatever your political persuasion.
You know, this book is not a technical book. This is a very accessible book. This can be read by anybody. I believe in the power of language, the power of ideas, the power of books. You know, that's never sufficient, but that's often a condition for political change. I believe in that this can have an influence, but at the same time, one has to be modest.
Are we doing it completely wrong here, Monsieur Piketty?
Oh, no, I'm not thinking.
You are a kind of rock star now, but it looks like you unleashed a movement.
Yes, well, you know, it's a bit early to say, you know, the kind of influence, you know, this book will have. You know, it takes a very long time for ideas and books to have a political influence. But I think ultimately, I believe in the power of ideas, the power of books, and I think this, you know, this can contribute to make a difference.
You don't need the money.
Yeah, no, I don't really. I have enough money, you know, to pay for my rent, to bring my children in vacation.
So what you earn with the book, you happily give away.
Yeah, I don't, you know, my own.
According to Piketty, there's no need to raise income taxes. But if we don't start levying wealth taxes, the gap between the rich and the rest of us will become unbridgeable. His book is translated into 28 languages, and the Netherlands is only one of the many stops on his book tour, a stop which includes a lecture for the Parliamentary Finance Committee.
I can only objectively observe that your book has stirred quite some debate in this country, and that's where I want to leave it as chairman of this meeting. And the questions and political weight, I leave that to the members of Parliament.
Let me first offer you a copy of this book.
Thank you.
And I am very honored to be here. Let me apologize for the fact that my English sounds a lot like French, and I'm sorry about this. I do what I can. To me, the fact that the book is now out in the Netherlands, it came out in Germany a few weeks ago, in Italy, it will come out in Spain, in China, in Korea, will come out in Japan in a few weeks. Of course, it's very important. This book is really a book about the history of income and wealth distribution. And so what I do primarily in this book is to put together a lot of historical evidence that had never been collected before and that we were able to collect with several dozen scholars from over 20 countries. And so you can see a big decline in inequality in the first part of the century and then a big increase in inequality in the recent decades. So as you can see, this is quite spectacular. So in the 1950s, 1960s, there was this belief in the so-called Kuznets curve, which was the view that, in advanced stages of development, you have a natural decline of inequality and a stabilization at a lower level. Well, as you can see, in the recent decades, we've had this very big increase, which has completely reversed the evolution. And I think now most people believe that this has contributed not only to the stagnation of median incomes in the US during this time period, but probably also this has contributed to the rise of household debt, and this has contributed to make the financial system more fragile in the years coming to the crisis of 2007, 2008. So this is a serious issue. So, this all depends on the institutions and the policies that we choose. Thanks a lot.
I talk a lot about democracy and making Europe more democratic, but ultimately democracy begins with the democratization of knowledge, and this is what I am trying to contribute to with this book. I think democracy depends on all of us. Politicians very often they just do what dominant opinion is asking them to do, or what they feel the dominant opinion is asking them to do. So what matters is to change the dominant opinion, and democracy is more than just election, and it's more than just voting. It depends on what we do in our life. It depends on demonstration. It depends on very different forms of political action, and primarily it depends on access to knowledge and access to information. And I think what the success of my book is showing is that there is a strong demand for economic knowledge, and people don't want to leave economic issues to economists and statisticians, and these issues are too important to be left to other people.
The next day, we meet Piketty in a 17th century canal house in Amsterdam, where the Dutch socialist Domela Nieuwenhuis was born in the 19th century. What's the state of inequality in the Netherlands today, in the 21st century?
Yeah, right now in the Netherlands, about 60% of the wealth belongs to the top 10% wealth holders. It's a lot, but it used to be even more. It was, over 90% for the top 10%. So the bottom line is that the wealth inequality has always been very large. It is a bit less extreme today than it used to be a century ago. But, the extension of the middle class seems to have stopped in the recent decades. And now the share going to the top tends to return in the direction that we had in the past. And at the end of the day, what really matters is that the different groups in society, the rich, the middle, the poor, must rise at rates that are sort of comparable. It's okay to have rich, poor, middle, but if the rich are rising 3 or 4 times faster than the average, which apparently is what's happening in the Netherlands, just like in other European countries, then in the long run, this can be, of course, a serious problem.
How does that compare to the 17th century?
Well, in the 17th century, the rich didn't have to escape, because they were controlling the government so well that there was not much to fear in terms of taxation and from the government. So today the problem is that they are able to escape and in effect to put national governments in competition with one another. And I think this is a situation that is quite dangerous for our democracy, because if the middle class feels that they are paying more than the very rich, if the small and medium-sized companies feel that they pay more than the large multinational corporations that can escape to tax havens, then I think this is the fiscal consent, the acceptance of paying large tax levels in order to finance our social model that is under threat.
That same evening, in Pop Temple Paradiso, Piketty has a book presentation which has been sold out for weeks. In the same dressing room where the Rolling Stones and Lady Gaga got ready to go on stage, the French economist prepares for an interview with journalist Joris Luijendijk in front of a capacity crowd.
But you should have some wine. I mean, she said she bought a special bottle, yeah.
Do Piketty's fans think that his proposed global wealth tax will become a reality?
Nou, het boek bestaat uit zijn onderzoek, dus de feiten dat hij heeft gevonden en ook een mogelijke oplossing dat hij brengt. En ik denk dat de oplossingen, ja, misschien kunnen gewoon mensen zeggen, nou, dat vinden we niet goed of niet realistisch. Maar ik denk dat de feiten blijven.
Dat is een beetje de centrale these van Piketty, dat het vermogen zich heel erg concentreert. Dat mensen in bredere zin het gevoel hebben dat macht zich concentreert op duistere plaatsen in de zin van niet democratisch controleerbare plaatsen. En dat we een soort gepiepeld worden, om het maar even populistisch te zeggen.
Alsjeblieft. Dank u wel. Goedenavond. En de andere kant.
Het is een beetje te veel, het hele gedoe. Het begint een beetje op een circus te lijken. Hij is veilig. Hij is ook een econoom, hij is ook middelklaas. Hij is white. He's safe. Hij is niet radicaal. Dus je kan hem makkelijk omarmen, dat denk ik.
I come up and then I will wait.
Yeah, as long as they don't see you, and then when I call you on the stage,
I come.
Yeah. Hello. Congratulations to all of you. You made it. This evening sold out faster than most rock bands. The word hype has been used quite a bit for Piketty. I don't think that quite accurately describes what this book is and will be. A hype usually ends. It's like perfume. You smell it and it's gone the next day. I think this is something quite different, and it also is part of a much wider movement across Europe. I will try to conduct a conversation that is both interesting for those of you who have read the book and also for those who only pretend to have read the book. Just give an ecstatic applause.
This is not a book for the left or a book for the right. This is a book for everybody who wants to read books and who is interested in trying to learn about these issues. And everybody can learn from the book, whatever your political persuasion.
Yeah. But then on page 574, you said social scientists must make stands.
Yes, but they must make stands like every citizen. It's not like the whoever lives at the Élysée Palace. Social scientists must take stand because it's too easy just to be outside observers, and so this is why at the end of the book I try to draw conclusion for the future, and I try to take a stand on the kind of policies that could make a difference. And I don't ask people to agree with my conclusion. Ultimately, the objective of the book is to help people to draw their own conclusion and to write their own part 4. Yeah, I have no problem meeting politicians, but at the end of the day, I care a lot more about normal readers, which can include politicians, in case they read books. But I think what really matters in a democracy is the public debate and what the dominant public opinion is going to be in the future. This is what determines ultimately the outcome.
Well, let me thank you very much.
Hello. Nice to see you.
think we are in a pretty dangerous situation. I'm not that very optimistic as you.
Okay. Well, you know, I try to be optimistic, you know, of course.
Ja, ik vond hem heel interessant in de zin dat hij gewoon echt weigert om politieke standpunten in te nemen.
Okay.
Het is na Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations en Fukuyama, de End of History, is dit gewoon het derde boek na de val van de muur. Waar het Westen echt helemaal van trilt. En dan denk ik dat Fukuyama en Huntington daarna ook echt heel vlijmscherp zijn gaan argumenteren. En dat doet hij niet. Van de andere kant creëert hij daardoor misschien wel heel veel ruimte die er anders niet was gekomen. De rechts staat klaar om van hem een griezelige marxist te maken. Dus misschien is hij eigenlijk heel erg slim bezig.
We invited you in our bookstore.
Oh, this was not possible to come?
No? So we came to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I don't know. My publisher probably thought that we didn't have time.
We came to you.
Oh, okay.
Die oude generatie economen en ook überhaupt Anglo-Saxisch is gewoon, ik heb gelijk, ik weet alles. Als je mij tegenspreekt maak je helemaal stuk en dus win ik het debat en moet je mijn boek kopen. Ja, hij is totaal anders. Hij zegt op pagina 1, luister, het is maar het begin, data zijn altijd incompleet, het is een eerste stap. Dus hij is uitnodigend, terwijl zo'n Krugman en eigenlijk heel veel van die economen, die zijn heel erg uitsluitend. Hè? Je bent het met me eens of je bent een idioot. En dus misschien modelleert hij ook wel de soort economie waar hij volgens mij veel meer van houdt. Die meer op samenwerking is gebaseerd dan op concurrentie. Modelleert hij zijn boek daar ook op. Dus in dat opzicht dat je daar weer zo lang over kan nadenken. Dat is dat zeggen ze wel eens. Hè? De nieuwe schrijvers zijn prikborden waar we van alles op kwijt kunnen. Als je jezelf heel precies definieert, ben je ook veel sneller weer uit beeld verdwenen.
Hello.
Hi. Actually, this is for my son. For our son who wants to study economy.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Linkse mensen hebben eindelijk weer een held. En iemand die gewoon iets kan brengen wat rechts niet direct van tafel kan slaan. Dus er hoeft ook een soort paniek bij rechts. En grijpen naar argumenten wat ze kunnen vinden. Het werkt niet. Is dit het begin van een soort keerpunt waarbij dat neoliberalisme, wat eigenlijk al 6 jaar als een zombie sinds 2008 doordreunt, eindelijk zijn genadeklap kan gaan krijgen?
Mr. Piketty. I also have a copy of the rich list, which was...
Okay. Yeah, I referred to that.
I work for the magazine.
Oh, so I hope I didn't seem... I mean, I like magazine, you know, but I think official statistical institutes should also do their job to produce that kind of data.
Yes, exactly. Well, we think so too.
You know, what he is tracking is the failed promise of neoliberalism, that by liberating capital, it would benefit everybody in the trickle down, and he is showing that quite the opposite is true. That it has benefited the elites that funded this ideological revolution and opened up this chasm of inequality. This is something that people already knew, but having that data has been empowering. And the argument I'm making is that precisely because this system is failing us already, we have a chance of changing it in time to avert climate change. If it were working fine, we wouldn't. I would be hopeless too. I don't think you can change an economic system that is working well for everybody because of a problem that is perceived as abstract and far off.
Canadian activist Naomi Klein stops in the Netherlands and Belgium on her global tour, which is even more hectic than Piketty's.
Welcome in Belgium.
After her bestsellers No Logo and The Shock Doctrine, Klein now sees the imminent climate change as a chance to shape a new economic world order. Her new book, This Changes Everything, is a hit around the world. Why are we so hungry for these kinds of stories?
When you're writing about challenging topics, emotional topics, existential topics like this one, you need to be in rooms filled with other people to talk about it. It's actually that people want not to feel alone. Mm-hmm. And it's a funny thing about our culture that we don't really have political spaces anymore. You know, like I think in another era, people went to political meetings a lot, right? But now we kind of need the excuse of the authors in town. So in a way, I feel like I'm just the excuse for people to get in the room together.
Welkom op deze boeiende avond met bestselling author en inspirerend boegbeeld Naomi Klein. In haar meest recente boek, No Time, Verander nu voor het klimaat alles verandert, doorprikt mevrouw Klein dan weer de mythes rond het klimaatdebat. Ze zegt daarin, klimaatverandering is niet zomaar een ramp, het is eigenlijk tegelijkertijd ook meteen onze beste kans om een betere wereld te bouwen en te eisen. Dat impliceert wel dat we alles anders zullen moeten doen dan we gewoon zijn, zegt ze nog. En de meeste mensen zijn wel voor verandering, zolang u verandert, die ander of de buren. En zolang er misschien een handleiding bestaat die zegt dat het pijnloos zal zijn en dat het ook instant kan gebeuren. Naomi Klein.
I think we spend a lot of time looking away from climate change, and sometimes this gets called apathy. I don't believe it. I don't believe we are indifferent about the future of our planet and the future for our kids. I don't think it's possible to be indifferent about something like that. I think it's possible to be so terrified that we look away. And I think we exert a tremendous amount of emotional energy just stuffing this away and even not thinking about it because it is so difficult. And I think part of the reason why we look away is not because we can't handle the reality, but because we don't see a path forward. So if we can use this twin crisis of an economic system that is failing and a planetary system that is calling out to us, we might just have a chance. I don't see a point of writing books like this if there's no movement to use them, to pick them up. When I'm writing, it requires a huge amount of isolation. But then once the book is done, then I'm basically in a campaign mode. I mean, so it's two modes, right? When I'm writing, I'm a writer. And when the book is out, it is this kind of campaign of how do you get an idea into this incredibly supersaturated culture. That, I think, is like any kind of political campaign.
You are more beautiful than the other one. Who is the other? More beautiful.
I heard well, it's amazing what's happening in your country. Yes. Are you happy?
Soyez le bienvenu.
But moments of great stress, moments of crisis, are moments when we're tested. And there are different ways that we can respond to these tests.
We have an economic system that defines success as economic growth. And when it is not in economic growth, that's a crisis. And anything is acceptable in the name of getting back to growth, including sacrificing the stability of the planet.
This factory is important not just to Greece. It's known in resistance movements around the world. This is an example that must be known, that must be disseminated, which is why we wanted to have this event here and to draw the media here, because the media in Greece isn't doing its job in letting people know that alternatives do exist. Instead, they're just repeating over and over and over again the mantra that there is no alternative. I joked when I was in Athens that Margaret Thatcher is alive and well and living in Greece and working for the mainstream media.
You have countries like Greece being told that their only way out of economic crisis is to drill for oil and gas in the Aegean and Ionian Seas, which is tremendously high risk for an economy that is built on tourism and fishing. I think it calls for a real rethink of how we've approached the problem so far, and that's what I'm trying to do with the book, is sort of challenge the dominant model that we've heard, which has sort of divorced climate change from all these other issues, you know. We can just talk about climate. We can just talk about it in this very technical, scientific way and talk about the technocratic solutions that we need to adopt to deal with this crisis. And my book is saying, you know what? The problem isn't exactly carbon. The problem is capitalism. The problem is that climate change is unfolding within an economic system that is built to exacerbate the crisis because it's pursuing short-term growth. This is a factory that was closed down in the midst of the economic crisis, and the workers occupied it, and they were deciding whether or not to just sort of demand back wages or whether or not to potentially turn it into a cooperative. And that factory is part of a broader movement, of people really trying to develop economic alternatives to capitalism in the midst of the economic crisis. So, I think it's a great example of how crises can be catalysts for positive transformation to another economy.
And then just back to camera for a couple there. That's perfect, like that. I feel like I've done well here. And could I get you to just lift that back?
I'll just give you my address. Okay. So Alex at ThreeNL.
Fantastic. It's a brilliant book, actually. You can see how much hard work you've put in. Any chance that Cameron's going to read it? Or maybe Miliband?
People are also in a situation where they've totally lost faith in their political leaders. They don't believe their political systems are capable of solving problems anymore. That's the biggest problem we face.
She's a vegetarian. I've been trying to convert her since I was about 7. So.
She's such an inspiring person, and I really, really admire her work. And she's just so honest and truthful. You feel someone so helpless, but she seems to have some of the answers anyway.
It's just important that people are bringing these issues up to light, because for a long time, especially with neoliberal economics, there's just been this divide between state, nature, and this kind of ethereal economics. The economy is this kind of object that sits above everything else, and it's important to have people tying it to reality.
But does it give you any sort of concern that a lot of things, the statistics you base your position on, are at least contestable? There have been 14 papers that say that the most likely effect of doubling CO2 emissions from 400 to 800 would be an increase of 1.4 degrees centigrade, which won't cause any problem. And we haven't had any global warming for 18 years. Does that worry you at all?
Just giving me, well, I'm delighted you've purchased the book. If you,
I might give it to somebody in the queue.
You know what? Thanks very much. Thanks for what you said.
Any thoughts?
I think pretty much everything you said is untrue. Yeah.
I think that Naomi's books can give a focal point for the left to kind of rally around and sort of enter popular perception, and you see these kind of peaks of interest in it. So I think it's genuinely important.
Shopping sustainably, being aware of little things like leaving the tap running or leaving the lights on. People that have the money to have solar panels, fit solar panels, just little things that are going to help in that small way. And then there's always things like signing petitions, joining marches, things like that. If most people don't have the time or the public image to do what Naomi does, so from a kind of average Joe's perspective, I guess that's the most effective way that you can fight it and help.
If we're going to take climate change seriously, we need massive investments in the public sphere. We need to invest in the infrastructure that will get us off fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. So we need to invest in new energy systems. We need a huge rollout, the likes of which we haven't seen since the post-war period. We also need to be investing in public transit, in the rail systems that will move us away from a car culture. We live in a time where all we hear from our elites is that they're broke, that we have to cut back. Yeah. What I'm arguing is that climate can be the glue to bring together a genuine mass coalition, but also can provide the framework for what the next economy should look like.
How does that feel?
I think put my glasses on.
Yeah. Does it feel like it's on?
Yeah, it's on.
She's often described as a writer who is anti-globalization, anti-war, anti-capitalism. When I read her work, I find she's one of the most pro people I've ever met in writing.
Now, one of the countries that
that's showing that it's possible for us to transition very quickly is Germany right now. It's in a half. Germany has gone from having 6% of its electricity coming from renewable energy to 25%, which is a pretty staggering transition. In order to take part in this transition, hundreds of cities and towns in Germany have voted or decided to take back control over their energy grids from the private companies that had purchased them in the 1990s. And they have done this because the private companies are not interested in participating in the energy transition as quickly as voters want to.
Local initiatives can inspire others when made more widely known, according to Klein, like this network of people in Germany providing 26,000 people with clean energy without any state subsidy.
Wir haben hier so eine ganz klassische Finanzierung aufgestellt mit 80% Fremdmitteln, 20% Eigenkapital. Damals hatten wir ja noch D-Mark-Zeiten, das waren so ungefähr 20 Millionen D-Mark, die wir hier investiert haben, die ersten Anlagen. Und dann die Eigenmittel, das sind dann halt 4 Millionen D-Mark gewesen. Und da sind 3/4 hier vor Ort aus Wiemersdorf gekommen. Und 1/4 haben wir dann noch mal ein bisschen weiter, den Kreis ein bisschen weitergezogen. Und ein paar Leute mit dran beteiligt, ja, die überwiegend schon mal irgendwo mit Windkraft zu tun hatten, aber die ein bisschen weiter weg herkamen und haben so das notwendige Eigenkapital insgesamt aufgefüllt dazu.
These success stories are essential for Klein's campaign. They incite people to take action, and in doing so, they increase the chances of real change. Since the book release, an impact producer has been working to implement Klein's message by bringing various climate-related groups together.
All right, be in touch, okay?
Beside the book, there's a film, a blog, and a website, the Beautiful Solutions Gallery.
Naomi's had back-to-back media with a whole range of press here in the UK, as well as doing 2 big launches in London and New York, and she's now speaking at the Cheltenham Literary Festival. And in between that, we've also had some really fantastic movement outreach workshops in Oxford and in London. We've probably met with about 80 people from different social movements. We know that it's not books that change the world, it's actually social movements. So part of my job is working out how to engage with social movements and organise as an activist and say, I've got this book and digital platform, we're going to have this sort of spark moment when it's been distributed, and how can Naomi share her platform so that other voices are also amplified?
This idea of what can I as an individual do, I would argue that that question is a product of the triumph of neoliberalism. That the very idea that you would be confronted with a planetary crisis and want there to be an action that you as a lone individual could do to impact the planet is actually kind of crazy.
Because that's
of course you can't do it alone. You need to do it in massive groups of people. So I think what is needed now to confront this crisis is really an integration of different movements that are already challenging the failures of this economic system on other fronts. We're in a moment when there's a deeper discussion about inequality and the failures of this economic model than there ever has been in my lifetime. So it's not like the only problem with this economic system is that it's causing sea levels to rise. It's that we're allowing sea levels to rise in the name of protecting an economic system that is failing the vast majority of people for a host of other reasons. So the argument I'm making is this needs to be the same conversation, not a whole bunch of different divided conversations.
What we need today is intellectuals who are not bought, not compromised, who have an independent voice, who are willing to say the uncomfortable things, however uncomfortable it is for those in political or economic power. And I think that the term organic intellectual, which comes from Gramscian thinking in the 70s, is about saying the best intellectual work is not simply done from sitting in an ivory tower, but when that work is connected to the issues that real people are facing in their day-to-day lives. And I think Naomi does that, and that's why she earns the title Organic Intellectual.
Right now, and in my country, in Canada, 75 people were just arrested trying to stop a pipeline outside of Vancouver that would carry tar sands oil. And most of the people who are getting arrested are talking about saving their coast, saving their waters that they love and depend on. But this is part of a global movement. This is part of a global movement of people who are doing the same thing where they live. And added together, they can take credit for keeping a huge amount of carbon in the ground. And so, one of the things that a writer can do that maybe, activists don't have time to do is just do that research, add that up, draw those connections, and elevate that in a way that, emboldens people to fight another day.
What can we do as individuals?
Well, I think, direct action with respect to politicians and elected members of parliament, like, sending letters, signing petition, doing demonstration, can make a very big difference if they make specific, precise proposals. I think the problem is that too often normal citizens don't get into what they view as the technical details of policy. And the problem is that technical details are not technical details. They are important. You cannot just say we want the tax system to be fair, or we want Europe to be democratic.
And we have our revolution.
Is that why Occupy didn't work?
I think that's partly why Occupy didn't work, and also, I think Occupy was a relatively small movement, at the scale of the US. I think it requires much broader segment of the population to try to influence our members of parliament and our politicians. But members of parliament and politicians, they are not bad people, they are just responding to incentives. Sometimes they are a bit lazy, they just want to remain in power, and they are not very imaginative or very creative. But I think they respond to incentives. One century ago, people would have said that progressive income tax would never happen, and then it happened. And 5 years ago, people would have said that bank secrecy in Switzerland was with us forever. And then, it just took a few US sanctions against Swiss banks for the Swiss government to change their law. So you cannot just ask politely to tax havens from stopping to be tax havens, or you can not ask just politely to those who benefit from financial opacity to stop doing so. This is very naive approach. You need tough sanctions.
But our politicians seem difficult to budge sometimes, because it's not just the voters they listen to. While Piketty addresses the people, the Dutch Prime Minister drinks a cup of tea with Bill Gates, the richest man on Earth, worth $76 billion. But last summer, Gates also had a phone conversation with Piketty.
Bill Gates called me, yes, we had a Skype discussion, yes.
Tell me.
Well, he doesn't want to pay more tax, and I am not surprised. So what Bill Gates told me, this was a very funny discussion. He told me, okay, I like progressive taxation, but I want progressive taxation of consumption, not of wealth. Because, if I don't consume a lot, then, if I do useful things with my money, then I should not pay high tax. And, then I ask him, okay, but, what's consumption for very rich people? Because, if you take the Koch brothers, who are these billionaires in America who are financing the Tea Party and Republican campaign, it's not that they consume a lot of food. When you're very rich, you cannot spend your money just on food. So what you're consuming is, when you're very rich, is you're consuming politicians, you're consuming academics, you're consuming other people's time, and you're consuming power.
And that's best done in privacy, behind closed doors, of course. Journalists are neither allowed to ask questions of Gates nor of the Prime Minister. Only 5 photographers are allowed in to make a quick snap.
You're visiting many countries now,
Yeah.
5 countries in 5 days.
Well, he's defending his interest, and billionaires in general, of course, they prefer to decide themselves what they want to finance. And, it's very nice, of course, to have the rest of the planet that come and talk to you and ask you, Mr. Bill Gates, could we have some of your support for our spending in health and education in Africa? And yes, okay, but is Bill Gates in the best position in the world on how to decide how to organize a health system or an education system? I'm not so sure. Governments in the past, have proved that they are able, to organize, public services, education system, health system in a way that sort of works, or at least works better than every other alternative we have. But for this, we need tax revenue. So, if the poor and the middle class feel that they are paying a higher tax rate than the billionaires, then they will not accept paying this tax revenue forever. So I think it's important that billionaires like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett pay at least as much as their secretary, as Warren Buffett once said. And right now, they often pay less.
You consume influence. Wealth is about power. This is consuming the time of other people, just like Bill Gates, who was consuming my time in this kind of conversation. So this was only a 30-minute discussion, so this was okay. But so I can understand why he prefers progressive taxation of consumption, because it will be a way not to pay tax on all the money that he's giving to his own foundation.
We hebben nog nooit zoveel mensen gehad als vandaag. En daarin zie je gewoon dat Piketty echt een held is onder de economische studenten. Ja, hij is wel de typische professor waar je heel lang niks van hoort. Die alleen maar data aan het verzamelen is, onderzoek aan het doen en dan opeens met iets heel erg groots komt. En dat zorgt ervoor dat iedereen best wel geïntrigeerd is door deze persoon.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting book and a very important topic. If you don't have data, then it's so hard to, everybody can claim anything, but as soon as you know the facts, you have a solid basis for your arguments. It does represent hope for me. I think it's, he addresses some very important questions that are really topical, so I hope that he contributes to change.
The French Revolution, it could happen again, right?
It could happen again. We have revolution every day or all the time. In Hong Kong right now, you have an Occupy movement that is asking for more democracy in Hong Kong and in China, and things will happen in China. Nobody knows when and where and how it will happen, but things will happen.
Can you imagine a revolution in Europe?
Revolution. What is a revolution?
Violence.
What?
Take violence. Taking the money from the rich. Throwing stones.
Right, but whatever happens, what's really important is what happens the next day. So it's nice to have a revolution, but then how do you organize society the day after revolution? And that's the question that I am asking. And in the past we've had revolution with too little preparation of what policy we do next. So the Bolshevik Revolution, they wanted to abolish private property, but then how do you organize society after you have abolished private property? So I agree that violent social movement and revolution are sometimes necessary, but whatever and at the same time I think sometimes more peaceful evolutions can also work. But in any case, whether this comes from violent revolution or more peaceful evolution, we have to think of what we do the next day and how we organize society the next day. And it will be a mistake, to believe that we know what to do, that we know how to organize society, and all what we need, is a big violent clash to impose it. I think most of the time the problem is that we don't know what we want to do, and we don't know how we want to organize society. And so we need to think more and to think harder about this, before this can be implemented.
That's where the road we're on is taking us. But that has less to do with carbon than it does with capitalism. But make no mistake, this changes everything.
Against all odds, you did give me some hope.
Oh, good.
And I wanted to ask, because it's clearly about changing the system. I agree violence is not a good option. Usually it takes time. I read very clearly there is no time. What can we do in the next 12 months, and what can our leaders do in the next 12 months to actually get to action?
Here's the thing. Now we need to be cutting our emissions at a level that actually challenges the logic of economic growth. We can do it. We can do what scientists are telling us we need to do in wealthy countries, which is cut our emissions by 8 to 10% a year. But we can only do that within the context of a far more strategic economy than the kind we have now. We have to contract in certain areas, and we have to expand in low-carbon areas. But we can't have a model that is just pursuing growth at all costs. You know, the hold of neoliberalism is still pretty strong among our elites, as we know. But its hold over the public imagination has really eroded. Indeed, this ideology, this ideological project is in tatters, which is why there is such a tremendous appetite for talking about inequality, talking about the real record, now that we're not talking about theory, but talking about experience and practice.
Nou, wat me zo opvalt is dat die moderne intellectuelen, of zo, als je ze zo wil noemen, meteen ook oproepen tot een soort activisme of zo. Je kunt je niet meer verschuilen voor wat ze zeggen. Dus ik kom hierheen met mijn vriendin, die zei net, dit wordt weer een avondje depressief worden. En dat is zo, want je gaat zo goed geïnformeerd worden dat je daarna wel iets moet doen en iets wil doen. En dat is, bij Piketty is dat precies hetzelfde. Wat hier zo ongelooflijk moeilijk aan is, dat je, wat ga je in godsnaam aan doen? Dus je leest no logo en dan koop je een duurzame ecologische jas. En dan hoop je dat je je bijdrage hebt geleverd, maar hier weet je dat niet. En daarom loop je depressief de zaal uit en daarom moet je je wel gaan verdiepen en uiteindelijk eindig je dan als activist. Dat kan niet anders.
If you feel cynical about activism and social movements, and you think that change can only be something that happens, through political parties and kind of in the halls of power, and you know that those systems are pretty corrupted and not working and really not up to a task like climate change, then you're going to feel pretty discouraged. So, I think the reaction on this key point of whether or not you feel hopeless or hopeful is really about how you think the world can change. And right now what I find more broadly is people who have a theory of change that is based on elite power feel completely hopeless. Yeah. And people who believe that change can actually happen from below are starting to feel hopeful again.
If you knew that you would die today, you saw the face of God and love, would you change? Would you change?
Als jij zelf mocht kiezen, wat zou je dan willen worden? Een boef of een superheld?
Superheld. Waar is jouw haar? Goed zo.
Ja, is dit een paard of een ezel?
Ezel. Weet je wie ook zulk haar had, Jonas? Ja? Breivik had dat ook.
Die jongens in Parijs hadden ook een muts, hè? Ja. Die lijkt wel, kijk mis aan. Die lijkt wel een beetje op die jongens.
Ik zeg ook steeds van, dat is niet zo. Maar ze blijven het denken. Die meneer ging met pistolen, ging die jonge mensen op een zomerkamp doodschieten.
De meeste boeven zijn Marokkanen. In Parijs en in Syrië. Het zijn allemaal Marokkanen en moslims. En jij ziet er ook wel een beetje uit als een boefje. Eerlijk.
Ja.
Die lijken allemaal een beetje op jou. Die hebben bruin haar, die hebben bruine ogen.
Dus dan is het aan jou om dat tegen te spreken, toch?
Ik wil dat je 5 keer sorry zegt.
Sorry.
Zeg papa maar na. Ik. Neem. Afstand.
Van? Verschrikkelijke dingen.
Sorry. Van?
Iedereen. Met? Een? Muts.
Vind je zelf een boef?
Ja.
Waarom?
Jij zegt dat.